The human fleet gathered in the darkness of space like a pack of hungry wolves. Admiral Do-hyun stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Retribution, watching as more ships arrived every hour. Each vessel was built for one purpose only: war. Unlike the smooth, beautiful ships of other alien species, human warships looked like flying fortresses. They had thick armor plating, countless weapon ports, and angular designs that seemed to cut through space itself. The aliens built their ships to look elegant and peaceful. Humans built theirs to survive and kill. "Final count, Admiral," reported Commander So-young as she entered the bridge. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and scars from many battles. 237 ships ready for combat. All crew aboard and supplied, Do-hyun nodded. It was the largest human fleet ever assembled. But he knew it might not be enough. The Korath Empire controlled hundreds of worlds. They had been building their military for over a century. "What about the special teams?" Do-hyun asked. "Colonel So-young's units are ready," the commander replied. "Every soldier knows the mission. No prisoners except for information. No mercy for slavers." In the lower decks of the ship, Colonel So-young was briefing her special forces. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were humans who had trained their entire lives for the worst kinds of war. They were experts in fighting enemies who thought they could not be beaten. "Listen carefully," So-young said to her troops. "The Korath think they are the perfect warriors. Their technology is better than ours. Their armor is stronger. Their weapons are more powerful." The soldiers listened without speaking. They had heard this before about other enemies. "But they have one weakness," So-young continued. "They fight like machines. They follow patterns. They do what their computers tell them to do. They have forgotten that war is not about technology. It is about the will to win." In another part of the ship, Min-ho was studying everything the humans knew about Korath military tactics. He was the fleet's best tactical analyst. His job was to find ways to beat enemies who seemed unbeatable. The information was not encouraging. The Korath had energy shields that could stop most weapons. They had ships that could repair themselves during battle. Their soldiers wore armor that made them nearly invincible. Worst of all, they used brain control devices to turn captured enemies into slaves who would fight for them. But Min-ho had found something interesting in the old battle records. The Korath always fought the same way. They would attack in perfect formations. They would follow their battle plans exactly. They never changed their tactics even when they were losing. "They are too perfect," Min-ho said to himself. "That is their weakness." On the communication deck, Jin-ae was monitoring all the radio signals from Korath space. She was hearing panicked messages between their military commanders. The Korath knew the human fleet was coming, but they did not understand what that meant. "Their commanders are arguing about how to fight us," Jin-ae reported to the admiral. "Some want to meet us in open battle. Others want to wait behind their planetary defenses. They cannot decide." Do-hyun smiled grimly. The Korath were used to fighting aliens who followed the rules of civilized warfare. They expected formal battles between fleets in empty space. They expected their enemies to try to capture territory and hold it. They had no idea that humans did not fight that way. "Send the signal to all ships," Do-hyun ordered. "Operation Wild Hunt begins now." The human fleet did not stay together as it entered Korath space. Instead, it scattered like seeds in the wind. Small groups of ships went in different directions toward different targets. The Korath military watched in confusion as their sensors showed human ships appearing all over their empire. Captain Woo Jin commanded a group of 12 ships heading toward a Korath supply depot. His mission was not to capture it, but to destroy it completely. The Korath had built massive storage facilities to support their armies. They thought these bases were too far behind the lines to be attacked. They were wrong. Lieutenant Yoon-ji led the first human soldiers to land on a Korath world. Her target was not a military base or a government building. It was a school where young Korath learned to be soldiers. The building was full of children who would grow up to be slavers and conquerors. Yoon-ji's orders were clear: disable the facility and capture the teachers. The children would be sent to special camps where humans would teach them different ideas about right and wrong. The Korath Empire would not get a new generation of perfect soldiers. All across Korath space, human ships struck at targets no one expected them to attack. They hit supply lines, training facilities, communication centers, and civilian infrastructure. They did not try to capture territory. They tried to make the Korath Empire stop working. Back on his flagship, Do-hyun received reports from all his commanders. Everything was going according to plan. The Korath military was running around trying to defend everything at once. They could not figure out what the humans were really trying to do. "Admiral," called Captain Junseo over the communication system, "we have a problem at the Korath Neural Control Center on planet Zex-7. "What kind of problem?" Do-hyun asked. "It is bigger than we thought. They have millions of slaves connected to their brain control machines. If we just destroy the facility, all those people will die." Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Other alien militaries might have decided the slaves were acceptable losses. But humans had a different way of thinking about war. "Take the facility intact," Do-hyun ordered. "Capture their scientists alive. We will find a way to free the slaves without killing them." This was why the Korath Empire was about to lose. They saw war as a simple matter of destroying enemies. Humans saw war as a problem that needed to be solved completely. They did not just want to beat the Korath military. They wanted to free every slave and stop the Empire from ever taking more. As the first day of fighting ended, Commander Hyewan sent a report to Earth. She was a scientist who had joined the military to study alien technology. Her job was to learn everything she could about Korath weapons and defenses. "Their technology is impressive," she reported, "but it has one major flaw. It is all connected to central control systems. If we can capture those systems instead of destroying them, we might be able to turn their own weapons against them." The Korath commanders met in emergency session on their capital world. They had never faced an enemy like this before. The humans were not following any of the normal rules of war. They were attacking everywhere at once. They were capturing facilities instead of destroying them. They seemed more interested in freeing slaves than killing soldiers. "How do we fight an enemy that will not stand still and fight?" one general asked. "How do we defend against attackers who strike at targets we never thought to guard?" asked another. The Korath Empire had conquered 17 different alien species, but all of those species had fought predictable wars. They had tried to protect their most important worlds. They had tried to preserve their governments and their people. Humans did not seem to care about any of that. They cared about ending the war completely, no matter what it took. On the bridge of the Retribution, Do-hyun looked at the tactical display showing human forces spread across the entire Korath Empire. His plan was working perfectly. The enemy was confused and divided. They could not concentrate their forces because they did not know where the main attack would come. "Phase 1 complete, Admiral," reported So-young. "All primary targets neutralized or captured. Ready for Phase 2. Do-hyun nodded. Phase 1 had been about spreading chaos and confusion. Phase 2 would be about something much more serious. It would be about showing the Korath Empire what happened when they made humans angry. The Great Hall was silent except for the sound of breathing. Hundreds of alien beings sat in their seats, all watching the small figure in the center. Taemin stood on shaking legs, his blue skin pale with fear. He was the last hope for his people. "Please," Taemin said, his voice echoing in the huge room. "My people are dying. We need help." The Galactic Council had heard many pleas before, but this one was different. The Villani had always been proud. They lived on peaceful worlds far from the center of the galaxy. They grew food and made beautiful art. They never fought wars. They said fighting was for stupid species. Captain Jiwoo sat with the other humans in the back corner. Her face showed no feeling as she listened. She had short black hair and scars on her hands from old battles. The other aliens barely looked at the human group. Most of them still thought humans were too violent to be trusted. 50 years ago, when humans first met other alien species, things had been very different. The humans were excited to meet new friends among the stars. But the aliens looked at human history and saw only war. They saw the bombs humans had dropped on their own cities. They saw the millions who had died in human wars. "You are too dangerous," the aliens had said. "You cannot join our peaceful alliance." So humans had been left alone. They built their own ships and explored space by themselves. The aliens watched them but kept their distance. They thought humans would destroy themselves eventually. Now Taemin was begging these same humans for help. "The Korath Empire grows stronger every day," Taemin continued. "They have taken 3 of our worlds already. Millions of my people are now slaves. Their machines control our minds. We cannot fight back." Hyun-soo, the human diplomat, leaned close to Jiwoo. He was a thin man with kind eyes, but his voice was hard when he whispered. "Funny how things change," he said quietly. "They would not let us join their club. Now they want us to save them." Jiwoo nodded but said nothing. She had been fighting wars since she was 20 years old. She knew what the Korath Empire was capable of. They were not like humans. They did not get angry or sad. They simply took what they wanted and killed anyone who stood in their way. The Korath had perfect technology. Their ships could not be hurt by most weapons. Their soldiers wore armor that made them almost impossible to kill. They put small machines in people's brains to control them. Once someone had these machines in their head, they became a slave forever. But the worst thing about the Korath was how they thought. They believed some species were born to rule and others were born to serve. They had been conquering worlds for over 100 years. 17 different alien species now served them as slaves. The Villani had tried to fight back with their advanced science. They had tried to negotiate. They had asked other alien species for help. Nothing worked. The Korath kept coming. "We know humans are different," Taemin said, choosing his words carefully. "We know you understand war in ways we do not. We are asking you to help us fight an enemy we cannot defeat alone." The leader of the council, a tall alien with purple skin, spoke up. "The human delegation may respond." Hyun-soo stood up slowly. All eyes turned to him. He was not a soldier like Ji-woo, but he understood politics. He had been waiting for this moment for years. "For 50 years you have kept us out of your alliance," Hyun-soo said in a calm voice. "You said we were too violent, too dangerous. You said peaceful species should not associate with war like humans." The alien leaders shifted in their seats. They remembered their old words. "Now you come to us because you need warriors," Hyun-soo continued. "You need someone who understands how to fight an enemy like the Korath. You need humans." Taemin's hands shook as he waited for the answer. His people had no other choice. Every day the Korath took more worlds. Every day more Villani became slaves. "What do you want from us?" the council leader asked. Ji-woo stood up next to Hyun-soo. When she spoke, her voice was like steel. "Full military authority," she said. "No rules about how we fight. No limits on what weapons we can use. You want us to solve your Korath problem? Then let us solve it our way." The aliens looked at each other nervously. They knew human history. They knew humans did not fight small wars. When humans decided to fight, they fought to win completely. "The human military will have complete freedom to act as they see fit," the council leader finally said. "All member species will provide any support requested." Hyun-soo smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "You should understand something," he said to the room full of aliens. "Humans do not just fight battles. We do not just defeat armies. When we fight a war, we end it completely." Taemin felt relief flood through his body. Finally, his people would have help. The mighty human war machine would save them from the Korath Empire. But as Ji-woo looked around the room at all the alien faces, she wondered if they really understood what they had just asked for. The Korath Empire had been conquering worlds for a century. They thought they were the strongest force in the galaxy. They had never fought humans before. In the back of the room, Do-hyun, a human admiral, was already making plans in his head. He thought about the ships waiting in human space. He thought about the soldiers who had been training for years. He thought about weapons the aliens had never seen. The Galactic Council had just given humanity permission to do whatever it took to stop the Korath Empire. They thought they were hiring soldiers to fight a war. They had no idea they had just unleashed something far more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced. They had unleashed human determination to not just win, but to make sure this kind of war could never happen again. The meeting ended, and the aliens went back to their ships feeling hopeful. Finally, someone would stop the terrible Korath Empire, but Ji-woo and the other humans stayed behind planning. They were going to give the galaxy exactly what it had asked for. They were going to end the Korath threat, all of it. The siege of Korath Prime began at dawn on the third day. General Woo Jin stood in his command center aboard the assault ship Thunder, watching as human forces surrounded the enemy capital world. But this would not be like any siege in galactic history. The Korath had expected the humans to bombard their cities from space, like other alien species always did. Instead, human ships took positions around the planet and waited. No shots were fired. No demands were made. The silence was more terrifying than any attack. "Sir," reported Captain Yoonji, "all ground teams are in position. We have identified every major target on the planet." Woo Jin nodded. His engineers had spent weeks planning this operation. The Korath capital was protected by massive energy shields and underground bunkers. It had enough supplies to last for years. The enemy commanders felt safe in their fortress world. They did not understand that humans did not attack fortresses. They made fortresses irrelevant. Begin Phase 2, Wu Jin ordered. Across the planet, small teams of human soldiers began their work. But they were not attacking military bases or government buildings. Instead, they went after much more important targets. Lieutenant Haiwan led her team into the underground cloning facilities where the Koreth grew their soldiers. Other alien species would have simply blown up the buildings. Haiwan had a different plan. Remember, she told her team, we do not destroy the equipment. We improve it. Haiwan was a genius with biological systems. She understood how the Koreth made their perfect soldiers in artificial wombs. More importantly, she knew how to make small changes that would have big effects later. Her team spent hours working on the genetic templates the Koreth used for cloning. They did not break anything. Instead, they made tiny adjustments to the DNA patterns. The changes were so small that no one would notice them for years. But when the next generation of Koreth soldiers grew up, they would have different ideas about right and wrong. They would question orders instead of following them blindly. They would feel sympathy for the people they were supposed to conquer. In another part of the city, Captain Jun Seo was leading the assault on the neural control centers. These were the facilities where the Koreth managed millions of brain-controlled slaves across their empire. The Koreth defenders fought bravely, but they could not understand human tactics. Instead of charging straight at the enemy positions, human soldiers moved like ghosts through the city. They used sewers, maintenance tunnels, and abandoned buildings to get close to their targets. We are not here to kill everyone, Jun Seo reminded his troops. We are here to free everyone. The Neural Control Center was a massive building filled with computers that managed the brain implants of slaves across hundreds of worlds. Other armies would have destroyed it with explosives. But Commander Hee-won, the neuroscientist, had a better idea. We take it intact, she said. Then we reprogram it. Hee-won had studied the brain control technology for months. She understood how it worked. More importantly, she understood how to make it work differently. Instead of destroying the control systems, her team captured them. Then they began making changes to the programming. Soon, instead of controlling slaves, the system would be sending different messages to the implants in people's brains. Messages about freedom. Messages about fighting back against oppressors. Messages that would turn the Koreth's own slaves into rebels. On the other side of the planet, Commander Jae-hun was implementing the most controversial part of the human plan. His target was not a building or a weapon system. His target was people. Protocol 7 is now active, Jae-hun announced to his teams. Begin systematic capture of all command personnel. Protocol 7 was something that made other alien species uncomfortable. Instead of just fighting the Koreth military, humans were hunting down every officer, every government official, and every person who had ever given orders to enslave others. They were not killing these people. They were capturing them for something worse than death, public trials for war crimes. Jae-hun's teams moved through the capital city with perfect coordination. They had studied the personal lives of every Koreth leader for months. They knew where these people lived, where they worked, where they went for entertainment. There was nowhere to hide from human hunters. Target secured, came report after report over the radio. Target secured. Target secured. One by one, the leaders of the Koreth Empire were taken from their homes and brought to special holding facilities. They would face human justice, which was very different from the quick death they expected. In the propaganda center of the city, Specialist Dongwu was setting up the most important weapon in the human arsenal, the truth. Dongwu was an expert in psychological warfare. His job was not to kill enemy soldiers, but to destroy their will to fight. He understood that the most powerful weapon was not a gun or a bomb, but an idea. Broadcasting in 30 seconds, Dongwu announced to his team. Across the Koreth Empire, every communication device suddenly showed the same image. Koreth leaders in chains sitting in human courtrooms, being forced to answer questions about their crimes. Citizens of the Koreth Empire, Dongwu's voice said in perfect Koreth language, you are watching the trial of General Vexmore, who ordered the enslavement of the Villani children on planet Telos 3. The Koreth people had never seen anything like this. Their leaders had always seemed untouchable, like gods who could never be questioned. Now they watched as these same leaders were forced to admit their crimes in front of the entire galaxy. How many children did you personally order to be implanted with control devices? The human judge asked. I was following orders, the Korath general stammered. That is not an answer. How many children? The broadcast continued for hours. Every Korath citizen watched as their mighty empire was revealed to be built on the suffering of innocent people. They saw their leaders begging for mercy from human judges who showed no emotion. But the most powerful moment came when the humans brought out the freed slaves to testify. Millions of beings from conquered worlds told their stories of torture, brain control, and forced labor. The Korath people learned that their comfortable lives had been built on the suffering of others. Many of them had never thought about where their food came from or who built their cities. Now they knew it had all been done by slaves. In his command center, General Wu Jin watched as reports came in from across the empire. The psychological warfare was working better than anyone had expected. Korath civilians were rioting in their cities, demanding that their government surrender. Korath soldiers were laying down their weapons and refusing to fight. Sir, reported Captain Yunji, we are receiving surrender requests from 12 different Korath worlds. They want to negotiate. What are our orders regarding negotiations? Asked another officer. Wu Jin was quiet for a moment. He remembered his briefings from Earth Command. The orders had been very clear about what kind of peace the humans would accept. There will be no negotiations, Wu Jin said. There will be unconditional surrender of the entire Korath Empire, or there will be complete destruction of their ability to wage war. They chose this fight. We will finish it. The siege of Korath Prime lasted exactly 72 hours. At the end of that time, the capital world was still intact. The population was still alive. But the government that had ruled over 17 slave species for a century no longer existed. In its place was something the galaxy had never seen before. A human military occupation designed not just to defeat an enemy, but to completely transform an entire civilization. The Korath Empire had learned what it meant to fight humans, but the rest of the galaxy was about to learn something even more important. What it meant when humans decided to rebuild a society from the ground up. Commander Sun Ho, the newly appointed military governor of Korath Prime, stood before the cameras as he made his first official announcement. The Korath Empire is ended, he said in a calm voice. But the Korath people are not our enemies. They were victims of their own government. Just like the slaves that government created. We are here to help them build something better. The Villani, who had asked for human help, watched the broadcast from their homeworld with growing amazement. They had wanted the humans to defeat their enemies. They had never imagined the humans would completely remake their enemies into something new. But as Ambassador Taman watched human soldiers teaching Korath children about democracy and individual rights, he began to wonder if his people had unleashed something they did not understand. The humans had not just won a war. They had begun something much bigger and much more dangerous to the existing order of the galaxy. 6 months after the fall of Korath Prime, the galaxy looked very different. Sun Ho stood in what used to be the Emperor's palace, now converted into a courthouse for war crimes trials. As the military governor of the former Korath territories, he had overseen changes that shocked every alien species in the galaxy. Status report, Sun Ho said to his aide, Colonel Young Mai. The tribunals have processed 8,000 Korath officials so far, Young Mi replied, checking her datapad. Another 2,000 are scheduled for trial this month. But sir, we are running into a problem. What kind of problem? The Galactic Council is asking us to stop. They say we are going too far. Sun Ho was not surprised. The other alien species had expected humans to defeat the Korath Empire and then leave. They had not expected humans to put the entire Korath leadership on trial for crimes against sentient beings. In the main courtroom, Judge Kyung-soo was hearing the case against former Korath Admiral Zircon, who had personally overseen the enslavement of 3 different worlds. But this was not like the quick military justice that other alien species practiced. This was something new in galactic history. You stand accused of crimes against 17 different species, Kyung-soo said to the trembling Korath officer. How do you plead? I was following the law of our empire, Zircon replied. Everything I did was legal under Korath authority. Human law recognizes no authority to enslave sentient beings, Kyung-soo responded. Whether your actions were legal under your system is irrelevant. The question is whether they were right. In the audience, Representatives from 12 different alien species watched the proceedings. They had come to see what human justice looked like. Most of them left feeling uncomfortable about their own governments. The humans were not just punishing individuals, they were putting an entire way of thinking on trial. Outside the courthouse, Dr. Bora was running classes for former Korath civilians. She was teaching them concepts that most alien species preferred to keep quiet: individual rights, democratic government, and the idea that ordinary people should have a say in how they are ruled. In human society, Bora explained to her students, the government exists to serve the people, not the other way around. Leaders are chosen by the people, and they can be removed by the people if they do wrong. The Korath students listened with fascination. They had never heard ideas like this before. In their old system, the emperor was like a god who could never be questioned. Now humans were telling them that even the most powerful leader should be accountable to ordinary citizens. But the real revolution was happening on the former slave worlds. Captain Inho led teams of human advisors who were helping freed slaves build their own governments. For the first time in over a century, these beings were free to make their own choices about how to live. The results were extraordinary. The Asuan Zalani, who had been forced to mine rare metals for the Korath, established a democratic council to manage their resources. The Thurksi, who had been bred as living computers, began exploring art and music for the first time in generations. The Veltok, who had been used as soldiers, laid down their weapons and became teachers. But not everyone was happy with these changes. Ambassador Tae Min of the Volani stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council with growing alarm. His people had asked for human help to defeat the Korath Empire. They had gotten much more than they bargained for. The humans have completely destabilized the entire Outer Rim, Tae Min reported to the assembled alien leaders. They are teaching dangerous ideas to species that were never meant to govern themselves. The council leader, a tall being with purple skin, nodded gravely. What kind of dangerous ideas? They are teaching slaves that they have the same rights as their masters, Tae Min replied. They are teaching conquered peoples that they should not accept conquest. They are teaching workers that they should have a voice in how their societies are run. A murmur went through the chamber. Most of the alien species in the Galactic Council had their own systems of social hierarchy. They had ruling classes and working classes. They had beings who were born to lead and beings who were born to follow. The human ideas threatened all of that. We must do something, said the representative from the Nixari Empire. If these human concepts spread to our territories, our entire social order could collapse. But what could they do? The humans had not broken any laws. They had done exactly what the council had asked them to do. They had defeated the Korath Empire. The fact that they had also freed millions of slaves and put war criminals on trial was technically beyond their original mandate, but not actually illegal. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Do Hyun was meeting with the human government about the next phase of operations. The military campaign against the Korath had been a complete success, but the political implications were just beginning. The other alien species are getting nervous, reported Defense Minister Hayron. They are starting to see us as a threat to galactic stability. Good, Do Hyun replied. Maybe they should be nervous. Maybe they should ask themselves why they are so afraid of people being free. The human government had made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. They would not just free the slaves of the Korath Empire and then leave. They would stay and help these beings build new societies based on human principles of individual liberty and democratic government. Back in the former Korath territories, the changes were accelerating. Commander Seung-ho had established the Democratic Systems Alliance, a new organization that included not just humans and the former Korath territories, but any species that wanted to adopt democratic principles. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of worlds that had been conquered by the Korath Empire chose to join the alliance instead of returning to their old governments. But even more surprising was the number of worlds from other alien empires that asked to join. We have received formal requests from 47 different worlds, reported Chung-ho to his staff. They want to leave their old governments and join our alliance. What kinds of worlds? Asked his aide. Mining colonies tired of working for alien corporations. agricultural worlds tired of growing food for distant masters, even some core worlds from the major alien empires. They have heard about our democratic principles and they want the same freedoms. This was the development that terrified the Galactic Council most. The human ideas were spreading beyond the former Korath territories. Beings across the galaxy were starting to ask questions about why they should obey leaders they had never chosen. On the former slave world of Terracon 5, the first free elections in over 2 centuries were being held. Human advisors helped the local population organize political parties and choose representatives. The results shocked everyone, including the humans. The newly freed slaves did not choose leaders from their old ruling classes. Instead, they elected former miners, farmers, and factory workers to govern them. They chose beings who understood what it was like to suffer under oppression. But the most shocking result was what these new democratic governments chose to do with their resources. Instead of selling their valuable minerals and agricultural products to the highest bidder, they formed cooperatives to ensure that the profits would benefit everyone. Ambassador Taemin watched these developments with growing horror. The Volani economy depended on buying cheap raw materials from less advanced worlds. If all those worlds started demanding fair prices for their resources, the Volani standard of living would drop dramatically. "We created a monster," Taemin said to his aide. "We asked the humans to solve our Korath problem, and they solved our entire way of life." The aide nodded nervously. "Sir, there are reports that some Volani colonies are asking about joining the Democratic Systems Alliance. They want to have elections." Taemin felt his blood turn cold. The very people his government had tried to save were now turning to human ideas about freedom and democracy. The Volani had always governed their colonies with a gentle but firm hand. They had told themselves this was for the colony's own good. Now the colonists were asking why they should not govern themselves. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in the capitals of every major alien empire. The humans had not just defeated the Korath Empire. They had introduced ideas that threatened the foundations of galactic civilization. The question was no longer whether the humans had gone too far. The question was whether it was too late to stop them. In his office on the former Korath homeworld, Sun-Ho received a message from Earth Command. The content was brief but significant. Phase 3 authorized. Begin expansion of democratic principles to all willing populations. Sun-Ho smiled as he looked out his window at the former imperial capital. In the streets below, beings from 17 different species were working together to build something new. Former slaves and former masters were learning to be equals. Former enemies were becoming friends. The Galactic Council had asked humanity to bring peace to the Outer Rim. Humanity had brought something much more powerful and much more dangerous, the idea that all sentient beings deserved to be free. The galaxy would never be the same. 5 years after the Korath liberation, Secretary General Inho stood before the largest gathering in galactic history. The Great Assembly Hall on New Geneva Station held representatives from over 300 worlds, all members of the Democratic Systems Alliance. "Today marks a new chapter for all free beings in the galaxy," Inho announced to the crowd. "Today we formally establish the Charter of Universal Rights." In the audience, beings from dozens of different species applauded. Former slaves sat next to former slave owners, now equals under the law. Former enemies worked together as allies. The old divisions between advanced and primitive species had been replaced by a simple distinction between free societies and oppressive ones. Ambassador Hayrin of the Volani watched the ceremony with mixed feelings. She was the daughter of Taemin, the ambassador who had originally asked humans for help against the Korath Empire. Her father had died 3 years ago. Some said from shame at what his plea for help had unleashed. The Volani had lost their colonial empire as world after world chose to join the Democratic Alliance instead. Their economy had collapsed when they could no longer buy cheap resources from subjugated peoples. Many Volani blamed the humans for destroying their way of life. But Hayrin was different. She had spent 2 years studying in human universities, learning about concepts like individual liberty and democratic government. She understood what her father had never grasped. The humans had not destroyed Volani civilization. They had revealed that Volani civilization had been built on the suffering of others. The Charter recognizes 3 fundamental principles, Inho continued. First, that all sentient beings have the right to govern themselves. Second, that no being has the right to own another being. Third, that all sapient species are equal in dignity and worth. These ideas had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Even in the territories controlled by the old Galactic Council, populations were demanding the same rights that beings in the Democratic Alliance enjoyed. In the back of the assembly, General Sujin sat with other human military commanders. She now led the largest volunteer military force in galactic history. Unlike the old Empire armies that fought to conquer and enslave, the Alliance Defense Force existed only to protect free worlds from oppression. The irony was not lost on Sujin. The galaxy had once refused to let humans join their peaceful alliance because humans were too violent. Now humans led a military force dedicated to protecting the peace and freedom of hundreds of worlds. "Sir," whispered Colonel Minjai, "we have received another request for protection. The hegemony of worlds is threatening the new democracy on Kepler 442. They claim the planet belongs to them by right of ancient conquest." Sujin nodded grimly. The old alien empires were not giving up without a fight. They could see that human ideas about freedom and democracy were spreading to their own territories. Their response was to try to crush these ideas with military force. It never worked. On the former Galactic Council homeworld, Supreme Leader Vexthal met with the remaining heads of the old alien empires. Once this gathering would have represented the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Now they felt like dinosaurs watching a meteor approach. "The situation is becoming impossible," reported Councillor Zur Malik of the Nexari Empire. 17 of our colony worlds have declared independence and joined the Human Alliance. Our own citizens are demanding elections and individual rights." Vexthal's purple skin darkened with anger. "How did we let this happen? They were supposed to defeat one enemy empire, not reshape the entire galaxy." "We underestimated human psychology," replied Admiral Kethvor of the Hegemony Fleet. "Other species fight wars to gain territory or resources. Humans fight wars to change ideas. They do not just defeat enemies. They convert them." The numbers were sobering. The Democratic Alliance now controlled over 40% of the inhabited galaxy. More worlds joined every month. Worse, many of these worlds were voluntarily leaving the old empires to embrace human concepts of freedom. "What about military action?" suggested Councillor Zur Malik. "We still have more ships than the Alliance." Vexthal shook his head. "Have you forgotten what happened to the Koreth Empire? They had the most advanced military in the galaxy, and the humans crushed them in 72 hours. But that is not the worst part." "What is the worst part?" asked Admiral Kethvor. "The worst part is that half of our own populations now agree with the humans. If we attack the Alliance, our own people might side with them." This was the real genius of human strategy. They had not conquered the galaxy through military force alone. They had conquered it through ideas that appealed to the basic desires of all sentient beings. The desire to be free, to have a voice in their own government, and to be treated with dignity. Back on New Geneva Station, the ceremony was reaching its climax. Philosopher General Sung Ho stepped forward to deliver the keynote address. He was one of the humans who had helped design the Alliance's political system. 5 years ago, Sung Ho said to the assembly, the galaxy asked humanity to solve a problem. They asked us to stop the Koreth Empire from enslaving innocent beings. We agreed to help. The audience listened in respectful silence. Everyone knew this story, but hearing it from one of the architects of liberation was still powerful. But as we studied the problem, Sung Ho continued, we realized that defeating the Koreth Empire would not be enough. The same conditions that allowed the Koreth to become oppressors still existed throughout the galaxy. The same attitudes that tolerated slavery and conquest were still common among the so-called civilized species. So we made a decision. We decided to solve the real problem, not just the immediate crisis. We decided to eliminate the conditions that make oppression possible. In the Villani section of the audience, Hyrin felt tears in her eyes. She understood now what the humans had really done. They had not just saved the Villani from the Koreth Empire. They had saved the Villani from becoming the next Koreth Empire. The Galactic Council believed that some species were naturally suited to rule, and others were naturally suited to serve, Sung Ho said. We rejected this idea completely. We believe that all sapient beings have the capacity for self-governance and the right to determine their own destiny. The applause was thunderous. Beings from species that had been enslaved for centuries stood next to beings from species that had once been slave owners, all united in their commitment to freedom. But in the diplomatic section, the few remaining representatives from the old empires sat in uncomfortable silence. They knew they were witnessing the end of their world order. After the ceremony, Hyrin approached Secretary General Inho in the reception hall. She had been preparing for this conversation for months. "Secretary General," she said formally, "I have a message from the Villani government." Inho turned to face her. He was a kind-looking man, but Hyrin could see the steel in his eyes that all human leaders seem to have. "What message?" Inho asked. "My government would like to formally apply for membership in the Democratic Systems Alliance," Hyrin said. "We are prepared to adopt all required reforms, including democratic elections and individual rights protections." Inho was quiet for a moment. The Villani had been one of the most resistant species to human ideas about freedom. For them to voluntarily join the alliance was a significant development. "What changed their minds?" Inho asked. Hyrin smiled sadly. "Reality. We tried to maintain our old system, but our people kept leaving for alliance worlds where they could be free. Eventually, our government realized they could either adapt or become irrelevant. And what about the people who still believe in the old ways?" "There are some," Hyrin admitted, "but every year there are fewer of them. The younger generation has grown up hearing about human ideas of equality and democracy. They do not want to live in a society based on hierarchy and privilege." This was happening across the galaxy. The human ideas were not being imposed by force. They were spreading because they appealed to something fundamental in the nature of sapient beings, the desire to be free. Later that evening, Inho met with his senior staff to discuss the implications of Villani membership in the Alliance. The numbers were staggering. With the Villani worlds joining, the Alliance would control over 60% of the galactic economy. "Sir," reported Defense Minister Kyung-min, "we are receiving intelligence that the remaining Council empires are planning some kind of military response. They are calling it Operation Restoration." "What kind of military response?" Inho asked. "They want to launch simultaneous attacks on Alliance worlds to try to break up our coalition. They believe that without human military protection, the other species will return to their old governments." Inho was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to smile.